Terribly sorry. Thank you all very much for agreeing to participate in this panel on an incredibly important issue with the Oxford Political Review. I'm Wong, the Editor-in-Chief of the Oxford Political Review. On February the 1st, 2021, the Tatmadaw in Myanmar mounted a coup against a civilian-led government under the National League for Democracy. And the country has since witnessed large-scale protests which have faced violent crackdown by an oppressive military. Civilian-military clashes have ensued, accompanied by large-scale strikes, peaceful marches, and standoffs between the protesters and the military junta government. Allow me to take this opportunity to introduce our wonderful speakers today. Coming up first, we have Min Thant, a member of the team of the Reuters journalists who won the 2019 Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. And she's become one of the most prominent and pronounced internationally recognized faces of a network of journalists who are bravely reporting from the front lines. Thank you very much for joining us. Secondly, we have Professor Ian Holliday, who's the Vice President at the University of Hong Kong and the author of Burma Redux, Global Justice and the Quest for Political Reform in Myanmar, co-author with Roman David of Liberalism and Democracy in Myanmar, and co-editor with Adam Simpson and Nicholas Forelli of Routledge Handbook of Contemporary Myanmar. And thirdly, we have U Lin, director at the Myanmar Institute of Politics and Public Policy, and an experienced policy analyst and advocate in the country. And finally, joining us later would be Wai Wai Nu, former political prisoner and the founder and executive director of the Women Peace Network in Myanmar. She spent 7 years as political prisoner in Burma, and since her release from prison in 2012, Nu has devoted herself to advocating democracy and human rights in the country. Through the Women Peace Network, Nu works to build peace and mutual understanding between Myanmar's ethnic communities and to empower and advocate the rights of marginalized women throughout Myanmar, particularly in a Rakhine state. We're so incredibly honored to be joined by the four of you for our discussion today, which should hopefully charter incredibly important questions to be asked and answered about the crisis worthy of our attention as a global political community. So on behalf of the audience, thank you all very much. Great. So I think the first topic I'd like us to potentially explore today concerns the current events on the ground and also just what's happening in Myanmar. So I was wondering if it's possible for you to just shed some insight into how things currently are, where you are, not exactly where you are, but just in general events on the ground.
Sure. So, I think there's sort of a couple different things that are happening on the ground right now. There is the sort of in the streets public protests, which are largely geared towards both refuting military, essentially propaganda that states that the election was a fraud and that millions of people actually support the military. But the NLD kind of won through essentially stealing votes, as well as gaining international attention. And then there is the strike aspect of the civil disobedience movement, which is really geared at trying to get public servants to essentially stop the work that they do in their administrations, as long as those administrations answer to, a coup government, essentially. And then there is the sort of leadership groups that are popping up that are essentially trying to both help guide these protest movements, but also gain legitimacy, especially with the committee representing Bidang Zuhluto, which is a group of elected government officials who are trying to essentially style themselves as the legitimate government and have the international community as well as people on the ground have a non-military based government to answer to and coordinate with.
That's also something I wanted to ask, actually. I'm bringing Lynn here on this front. When it comes to the relationship between the former ruling party, NLD, and also the army, and I think, you flagged just then that there's definitely this grassroots and also civil society-led effort to counteract the military coup. What is the sort of movement been on the front of the NLD, or has the NLD been trying to stay low for the past few weeks, I guess?
Yeah. Brian?
Yep.
Yeah. So NLD, most of the leaders had been detained, as you already know, everybody knows. But there are three key players who are members of Central Executive Committee of the National League for Democracy out. And the NLD headquarters it's running currently with over 20 people attending, going to the office at the headquarters every day. And the people are supporting them, and most of the directive representing NLD Central Executive Committee and signed by Wu Aung-Jinyo, who is one of the member of the CEC and who is also the member of parliament of the upper house. Now in Myanmar we call Myoda Hloto. And at the same time, like Min Thant mentioned, that CRPH has been formed, a committee representing Gyeongsu Hloto. Gyeongsu Hloto means the Union Parliament in Myanmar. So, and for 15 people running this committee, and they have been appointed. They have appointed 2 people, and so far, to handle the international relations. And then at the same time, NLD headquarters releasing some letters, directive for the people, and also connecting with other people across the country, NLD members, and working together with the people, and for CDM, so civil disobedience movement, and as well as connecting with international society.
Now, on the front of connecting with the international society, allow me to just say hi and introduce our wonderful panelist, Wai Wai. Hello, thank you very much for joining us, Wai Wai. We introduced you earlier on, but just on the front of international society, now I know that you've worked extensively with NGOs in both the States and also Myanmar, and especially in the Women Peace Network. Could you perhaps shed some insight into how the interactions have been between the women's rights movement and the events on the ground right now? And more generally, how are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you for having me today. It's an honor to be with all of you guys. Okay. I guess I would just say, the response from the civil society communities and people in general, as well as the international civil society's response, right? When the coup started on the February 1st, there were some reluctancy among political leaders whether they should go out or not. And I remember it was like mainly the young activists, the workers and farmers came out initially on the first day, and then others followed, and we had, I think 2 days later, we had a letter from the Aung San Suu Kyi. At the beginning, it was like people thought it was a rumor, that it was not necessarily Aung San Suu Kyi's letter to the public to protest against the military coup. I think since then, many organizations, many organizations on the ground working in the past on several issues come together, and sometimes, in a collaborative way, sometimes in their own initiative. They've been very, very active, and people are like, it seems like individuals and organizations, regardless of who they are in Myanmar, taking their own responsibility, taking an initiative by their own way, whatever way they can. So, a lot of them were, in fact, started from the young people, but then, the civil society organizations and rights groups are supporting them, and mainly like activist-oriented group are initiating most of the most of the protests. I've been very closely communicating with many of those groups, as well as engaging with the international human rights organizations and civil society organizations. There were in the past, when we had military dictatorships from 1988 to 2010, there were very active the Burmese friends of Burma, or allies, international allies and movement against the military dictatorship that somehow disappeared after 2010. But now it seems like they all come back, to support Myanmar. During this 10 years of period, they felt somehow, all the tragedy that we have, the human rights, gross international crimes violations and human rights violations, all of these rights groups support in the past, supported Burma democracy. They felt somehow betrayed by the systems and by the civilian government. But now when we are under danger again, they all come back to support Myanmar. It's been very, I am a Rohingya, but I also feel I'm a Burmese. It's somehow heartwarming to see the support that we are receiving now from the international human rights organizations and Burma-related organizations, in these days after this coup. By seeing that, I'm quite hopeful, but knowing what military can be, I'm also a little bit skeptical and realistic at this point. I think we still need a lot of support, both from the organizations, from the international organizations, as well as international governments. Burmese people within Myanmar, the momentum is very high. People are not going to give up anytime soon, but we still need a stronger support from the international community, I guess. I would address on the state policies issue later on.
Thank you very much for that, Wai Wai. And I think an interesting point that's cropped up across all three of your contributions and observations so far is just the sort of setting aside of differences and also reconciliation across divides amongst the people in face of the adversities right now. And I suppose a question I have is there also a palpable sense of fear, or is the fear more suppressed or subdued in comparison to the optimism and defiance? Would anyone have thoughts on this front? Maybe if you're keen.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's definitely a sense of fear, but the sort of anger and defiance and sort of this insistence on joy is really drowning out the fear. I mean, obviously people are taking precautions. I tweeted about this before, but you see a lot more people wearing shoes that they can run in. People are wearing pants much more than they are wearing longies or baseau. People are wearing construction helmets. Like there's only so much one can do without sort of the equipment that soldiers would have to go to a war. But at the last couple of days, we also saw people writing their blood types on their arm, as well as emergency contact and Sharpie, just in case, right? To anticipating death. On the night of the 24th. So on the night of the 22nd, state-run media on television made an announcement that essentially said, if you continue to protest, there will be a loss of life. And so, we had the largest protests we've ever seen the next day, but people went out with the assumption that they may not come back. Yet, at the same time, there was still a rock concert that day. So, there's a lot of defiance. Like people brought out loudspeakers and tambourines and guitars, and people were not going to sort of cower. And it wasn't a march of fear, it was a march of joy and defiance and solidarity.
So there's a very interesting mix of both sanguine solidarity and also, I guess, solidarity forged through the harsh circumstances that you're in currently. And On that front, I'd like to ask, actually, I want to bring in Ian Holliday here. Ian, from as someone who's currently in Hong Kong as opposed to Myanmar, what's your observation as an outsider? And do you think there's any sort of thoughts or insights you have on the front, on events on the ground, that you think perhaps perspectives inside the country might not necessarily be as privy to?
Well, first of all, let me say, Brian, thanks very much for including me in this panel. I actually think the most important voices that we can listen to right now are the voices of people who are in and from Myanmar. I'm not. I'm neither in Myanmar now nor from Myanmar. I've been one of Wai Wai's friends of Myanmar for many years, and I don't think someone like me, who's several thousands of miles away, has many insights about what's going on the ground right now. I mean, I'm constantly checking my Twitter feed in between meetings and all the other stuff that I'm doing every day to try to keep in touch with this amazing response to the coup. I mean, A was saying earlier on that this is really the biggest response that we've ever seen. 8888 was big, but this is bigger. And the fact that people are managing to kind of conquer the fear and to still come out on the streets and to find such creative ways of doing it, the joy that A mentioned, and the fact that people are determined not simply to kind of operate on the agenda that's been written for the country by the military with the coup on February the 1st, but to create their own agendas going forward, I think is a source of much hope. I mean, you use the word sanguine, Brian. I think that's a very apposite term. We do have to be very conscious of the power that exists on the other side, that has been demonstrated over many decades of Myanmar history, that it can be used and will be used against the people of the country. So we do have to be very sanguine about events going forward. But I'm just amazed by what the Myanmar people are doing right
now. Thank you very much for that, Ian. And I think what struck me there too was that when we talk about the Myanmar people, it seems that the notion of the people transcends cleavages, transcends class divides, transcends all sorts of divisions in terms of where you occupy in the structure, your positionality within it. And on that front, Lynn, would you have any thoughts on sort of essentially how solidarity is forged between perhaps former members of the governing class and the governing elite now expelled from government, and also grassroots activists? Because that's something that's quite remarkable, I suppose, about the ongoing waves of protests.
Yes, not only NLD, many leaders of the NLD, but also the others, the public figures and some journalists, as well as some people, particularly young people, have been detained during the protest. And But millions of people are protesting every day across the country, and 4 people lost their valuable lives, and 3 of them are young people. But civil disobedience movement is going strong, and therefore banking sector has nearly stopped, and people are not safe days and nights. People form the security groups to safeguard their security at night. And there's social unrest, and there's unclear future. People, youth in particular, feel losing hopes, dreams, and bright futures, all gone, including me. Many days we feel so bad about this military coup, but the current government, the state administration councils led by the military, and they keep saying that they are legitimate governments according to the Constitution 2008. But the NLD and other parties and people are not going to accept that. That's why they protesting on the streets. And the military show off on the streets to frighten people, but people have the hopes to get back democracy and democratically elected government. That's they go on the streets every single day to protest peacefully and request government stuff for civil disobedience movement. And this is not about red or yellow or blue or any colors representing political parties. Now you can see people come out for their basic human rights, freedoms of expressions, and democracy, and government of the people, by the people, for the people. And in particularly in the states, other states and regions, in the claim for the federalisms and to freely build their futures by themselves. And now one point is that Union Election Commissions and appointed by the State's Administration Council, led by the military, will organize a meeting on Friday, the day after tomorrow, 26 February 2021. So NLD recently mentioned that they won't join the meeting so far.
Yeah, so there's definitely an angle on that concerning the possible upcoming elections and also the NLD's response to that. But Wai Wai, do you have any thoughts on this, but also on the previous discussion we had about the relationship between the NLD and the movement, or more generally, the parties and the masses at large? I think you're muted, so you might want to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Yeah, would you mind reframing the questions a little bit? I don't think I understood well.
Yeah, of course. So it's just, in general, what do you make of the relationship between, I guess, formerly prominent political actors and parties and the masses at large in relation to the movement?
Well, that's a great question, and I guess difficult to answer. I think, you know, the momentum and the response that we are seeing today, it doesn't necessarily reflect the divisions among the political parties or across the ethnic groups, with the Burma majority-led political party and other ethnic groups, or also between the divisions between different political leaders, activists, and the political party, the main political party, NLD. I think that has not addressed yet. However, the response that people are showing and the support that people are showing to the National League for Democracy, NLD party, is with the notion that country is in danger. So they have responsibility to stand with the elected political party or elected government and support them to take the military down. That's the notions among majority of the people across the spectrum. So I think the other issue around the political goal of the different groups or different ethnic groups has not been discussed anything yet. There is a great precautions or frustrations among the ethnic communities as well as the other political leaders besides NLD, is that even if the NLD, let's say, restored the power, the situation might go to the status quo where we had this, very minimum discipline, like 75% of electoral democracy, right? So people are really frustrated about it. There are different political ambitions and goals that has to be discussed. And that is not happening yet. I mean, people are not pushing to because we are in a crisis, right? But I think, a longer discussions, a deeper discussions among the Democrats, among the civilians is essential if we are looking for a longer democratic future of the country.
Your point about the political structure and the legislature there actually is incredibly important and relevant, because as we transition into our next section where we talk about the causes and the events precipitating the coup, one cause or commonly cited factor is the Tatmadaor's effective control over the legislature and the political systems of Myanmar, even since 2011 or 2015, the elections then, and that's oft cited as a reason why the army has retained such significant influence. Now, I want to bring in A there on this front. Do you think that's a fair reading of the causation or the causality underpinning the coup, or do you think that's perhaps the effect as opposed to the root of the issue at hand?
It's a little bit of both, right? So with the coup, obviously the Tatmadaor is claiming legality through the constitution, and part of why people around the country dislike the 2008 constitution so much and really were pushing for change is because of the sort of amount of power it retained in military hands. But at the same time, there's also been a deep frustration from civil society and activists regarding the NLD's position in terms of pushing for change, because the NLD essentially responded to a lot of criticism and a lot of pushes for change by saying, well, if we go too far, the military will do a coup. And I think what we're seeing now that's kind of ironic is that a lot of the legal changes that weren't made and lots of reforms that weren't made are now being leveraged against NLD people, against CDM, especially legislative changes in terms of what is criminalized versus what is considered, essentially a misdemeanor, right? With Aung San Suu Kyi's, one of her charges of illegally importing walkie-talkies, that's a paperwork error, right? Essentially, it's not something that one should go to jail for, and yet under an administration that had quite a lot of power to enact these smaller sorts of changes, these were also not pursued in favor of retaining a lot of authority, sort of authoritarian authority in the states. And I think also I wanted to make a point about regarding what you were saying earlier about solidarity. I think something that's been quite undercovered so far is the issue of class. In what we're seeing around the country, there's quite a lot of talk on social media about it as well, is accusations that certain people are only protesting because they get to eat for free at protests, because there is such an outpouring of donations and material support. And there's also, this really rude sort of slang for people who are not dressed well at protests, or who people think might be sort of paid instigators, and they're calling them like 5,000 jet, implying that, their morality, their actions, them as human beings can be bought for a small amount of money. And, as the civil disobedience movement goes on, as the economy, which is already suffering under COVID, and will continue to suffer under COVID, worsens, class is going to be a really big issue. Labor organizing is going to be a really big issue. And if anyone's watching this who is covering news, I urge them to think about COVID and think about class and labor more.
Thank you very much. And on the class front as well, I want to bring in Wai Wai, do you share A's feeling and sentiments there concerning the classist sort of assumptions and problematics embedded in the movement?
It's quite complex. I agree with Min Thant on the way the public are seeing some of these, I guess, pores, and a sort of like prejudice against them. But on the other hand, I mean, that is true and that is valid. On the other hand, I'm also seeing that a lot of pores actually joined the protests, and through their network, even they form pores network, and they join the protest. And also, the railway workers, they are like, one of the poorest ministry, and the public service department that we have. These family members of the railway workers are resistant, and going out there, preventing, stopping the rails and the stuffers. So I'm seeing that, it's somehow, it's difficult to say, but it's definitely poors are on on our side as well. But on the other hand, there are, the practice that military has always been using, giving poors money to instigate or to kind of instigate violence or to attack the peaceful protesters. They use this thug culture, right? And that has been the practice. So there is some sort of, prejudice against them that exists, and I can also foresee that the poor will suffer the most, of course, and we will see more divisions between the poor and rich. And I don't know how long they can keep for this CDM movement, but it seems like people understand the consequences and the retaliations, and they are somehow prepared. But given the country is so poor, I don't know where we are actually moving to with already really bad economy. So I'm kind of really worried, but I think I'm not sure. Whether it's going to stop or not. It seems like they're not, but we have to wait and see. It's kind of it seems like it's encouraging. It's seeing that the energy and the motivation, the dedications of the people to join this movement, it's quite encouraging, and it's quite incredible to see. But at the same time, I'm really worried about the consequences that they would suffer.
That's
Brian.
Very fair. Yeah, Len. Yes.
Yeah. Can I add a few points?
Of course.
To some updates about the CDM, Civil Disobedience Movement. This is started by the doctors and health workers in Myanmar. And so far, I follow the news and also talk with people from from some ministries, my friends. And number one ministries in the government, it's doing CDM. It's Ministry of Health and Sports. And also you can see the news and according to my friends, doctors, and according to the TV channels and broadcasted by the government right now, and they've been suffering a lot due to the CDM. You can see it clearly. And for those like other ministries, the Ministry of Transport, like Wai Wai Nu mentioned that it's from the railway, yeah. So and others government stuffed and doing the CDMs, they have been supported by the people and for them. And there are some organizations such as the CRPH, a company representing they established a CDM supporting team. They tried to connected and they supported some salary for the government staff who are doing CDMs. So because you can see it in the Facebook page of the CRPH CDM supporting teams, they mentions how much they covered for who, and they also collecting the list of people what doing CDM, and also they also announced the supporting team, CDM supporting team for their livelihoods, and also there are many others, CSO, civil society organizations supporting CDM movement. And even you can see on the streets, the people, particularly young people, also old people, many kinds of people are supporting CDM, trying to help the CDM movement in Myanmar. And because according to some sources, then they told me that the military coup and last over 20 years, 2 decades. For example, in 1962 and 1988, and then 2010, right? So they fight for their, they don't want to lose this times their human rights and democracy, and they want to run, the people want to run the country with their votes. That's why you can see young, old, middle-aged, and of the people, including the political parties, activists, journalists, and others. People are on the streets and every day in most of the townships and cities. Even though from the villages, they are protesting and showing their will to for democracy and human rights. And one more thing is that people are claiming that people are requesting the international society, including UN and others, UN Security Councils, to help save Myanmar. Instead of, they also appreciate the statements of the UN and the US and the Western country, Japan, and others countries. But as you see it in protest, they go to the embassies and requesting for very active actions, take actions, and for their justice and for their human rights and for democracy strongly. So they ask international society to take very active actions and to for the justice of Myanmar, and to punish the military, some military leaders. In military, not everyone's. I mean, people think that not everyone want to do this military coup. There's a few top leaders. They did it, and they're doing this. So they want them to be, they want just justice. So the people are requesting and asking for help and justice from international society by providing actions instead of statements. Statement also help, but people want more actions.
Right. Thank you. And it strikes me that just drawing both strands together, that what you said, Justin, about the relationship between the poor and the army, that the army tends to co-opt the poor as much as they exploit them, and arguably wield them as a tool of entrenching their own influence by basically pitting poor folks against one another, also indirectly feeds into a broader trend and observation that the army in Myanmar seems to be complicit in, if not the main perpetrator of injustices, oppression, and severe persecution of the Rohingya people in the Rakhine state. And that, going back to what Lynn said, in turn seems to have undermined to some extent the persuasiveness of certain ethnic majority groups' calls for international support as well, simply because given the comment that's just come in, there's essentially this perception that the Myanmar civil society was silent over the genocide. Now, I think reality is definitely not like that, and that's a misconception or misperception to some extent. But would you say that there's an element of truth in that statement? Maybe we'll start with essentially on the complex relationship between the Rakhine states, the ethnic tensions and relations, and finally this current coup and the protest movement against it.
Yeah, so I think when I first began, or when the coup first started, there was quite a lot of people from outside of Myanmar who made comments along the lines of, well, aren't these the same people who committed genocide? Aren't these the same people who supported the military when they were being violent against a group that they didn't like? Isn't the NLD the same administration who, went to international court and defended the actions of the same military? Why should we help? Why should we be involved? And my answer to that, I was really angry and frustrated, was essentially that, if we build and allow systems in which injustice is allowed against anyone, it means we're all vulnerable. And it's just a question of when or if the group that we're a part of is subject to that same violence. But I also think, to your point earlier, Brian, we shouldn't undercount how horrifically racist Myanmar people are, like in general, but especially towards people, the Rohingya people, but also against Rakhine people, right? Like there is a deep sense of like Burman Buddhist culture as being the default culture of Myanmar, of being superior. My family's ethnic Chinese, and I have cousins who, despite the fact that my ancestors came here in like the 1890s, I have cousins here who are still considered sort of like immigrants or like mixed race or, second, third class citizens on their documents because, we're not sort of an indigenous Myanmar race, and citizenship here is not considered something one gains through civic duty and engagement and participation in society, but something that one is essentially gifted through one's like genetics and blood, and as problematic as race science is. But yeah, so I think the calls for international solidarity have been seen by many outside the country as extremely ironic, but I think that dissonance is also starting to penetrate within the country as well. And we're starting to see more and more signs, especially of younger people saying, I regret what I said and did during the Rohingya crisis. I understand now. I'm starting to understand that the way forward for Myanmar is not to say, well, don't hurt me, hurt those other people. It's, we all must be in solidarity with one another against a common enemy.
That's right. And Wai Wai, would you like to come in on this?
Sure. Yeah, I think there are growing sense of understanding on what happens to Rohingya, and definitely more and more sympathy. I'm seeing that from more younger generation, but not from any leadership yet. So that is quite, I would say just sad. That is, I think at this point, we should be able to see more of the mindset shift or mindset change. But what is preventing them is these deep-rooted racism and Burmese supremacism that Min Thant was describing. Because of that, they can't really see. The society is blinded by this, the military propaganda and divisive policy and this Buddhist Burman nationalism or nationalistic agenda that the military has orchestrated for so long. The society is blinded, whether, especially the older generation. So it's very difficult for them to see justice, to see what is right. But for many of us from the minority background, I think it's about what is doing the right thing, what is right for the country and for the people in general. And I've got the same questions, in early days, on February when the coup happened on February 1st and 2nd. That should we support this movement? Should we support the NLD, or is it worth it to even support this movement, right? My answer to that was yes. It was totally unfair, and I would say it's unforgivable and unexcusable, and the position that NLD has taken under their administrations against ethnic communities and specifically on the Rohingya, it's completely unforgivable. For instance, they are the one who publicly denied the Rohingyas, but the use of Rohingya name. Even they even send directive to the journalists and media not to use, and deny this gang rape and the thousands of women being sexually harassed and raped in Rakhine State. All this denial make me feel really sick into my stomach, but it doesn't necessarily prevent us to do what is right. And I don't think military dictatorship is answer for our country. So, we need to do everything we can to stop this military. And NLD has right to reform the government since they are elected by the people, as well as, military shouldn't have this power to unlawfully detain any political leaders, right? Any person in the country. They shouldn't have this power. I think we were wrong from the beginning. We did not address any justice from the beginning since political transitions happened. The civilian leaders and the world has compromised, and we failed to have transitional justice processes when we had the political transformations from the first place in 2010-11, and the military felt they've got free pass to continue manipulate the systems and continue do what they want to do. And in 2016-17, they carried out this gross, grave human rights violations, and they still they're not still held accountable, and the civilian government was the one protecting them from holding accountable. So when this military, historically famous for this brutal human rights violations, if they're immune repeatedly again and again, if they are given impunity again and again, what else do we expect from them? So I think this is what we are seeing as a consequence, as a result, and the country is paying the price. Not just the political party or leader, but the country is paying the price for the collective failure of political leadership as well as the international community.
Thank you.
Brian.
Yes,
Lynn? Just one point. Can I add?
Sure. Yep.
To support the Wai Wai Nu, because on the streets I saw people united because of this military coup, and you can see that, like I mentioned, it's not about colors. It's not about the NLD alone, because this is about the future of the country. That's why most of the people on the streets are young people, and particularly I want to mention that all the religions, including I saw the Muslims, Christians, and Buddhists, and Hindus, and others, other ethnics. They all on the streets and protesting, fighting peacefully for their rights, human rights, and democracy, and for the future of the kids, the future of the younger generations. So this is the situation now in Myanmar is quite bad, but I see some good things. It's like because of this, I saw the unity, and in the futures, I think there will be new constitutions replacing 2008 constitutions in order to form the federal states. And with the new constitutions, to assign the military to defend the people and the country under the presidents elected by the people, and the president must be commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And you can see the ethnic armed organization also releases statements. They also protect the protesters, demonstrators, and in the regions. Particularly, you can see in the Kayan states and KNU and DKBA. Also, the KNU released very strong and statements, and they are protecting their people, the Kayan people in Kayan states, and standing with the people across the country. And this is for example. And also in Shan states, also RCSS already mentioned, the ethnic armed groups mentioned that they stand with the people and they will help people who seek for help and protect the people. And for militaries, there should be no power in the executive, judiciary, and legislative. And in the futures, I hope that we will hope that all the businesses and the military could be moved to the ministries. That these are some points, good points. I mean, good things in the futures because of this military coup.
Thank you for that. I guess a question I have on that front, though, is it does strike me that there are two dimensions at play here. The first is the idea of democraticity in terms of independence from the military, having constraints and also limits on military power. But the other dimension is on ethnic representation and also inclusion of the Rohingya people and their rights. And we could hypothetically imagine a case of democratization. Actually, we don't need to imagine that, but to some extent there was sort of democratization in Myanmar in terms of the institutional constraints on the military. Maybe not enough, but there was some of that. But yet the rights of the Rohingya people were still grossly underrepresented, if at all, on a national stage. So on that front, I was wondering, Ian, if you have any thoughts, because you've written extensively on political reforms and democratization in the country. And I was just wondering, to what extent was the Rohingya crisis a crisis of Myanmar's constitution's own making, or was it more of a miscellaneous and very severe harm impinged upon the Myanmar people by solely the military?
Thanks very much, Brian. I found the statements just made by Wai Wai and Ulin very powerful. And I think one of the great aspects of this movement and this moment is that kind of consciousness of ways in which maybe the last 10 years haven't unfolded as well as they might have done. And it's not all the fault of the military. Some of it is the fault of the society. And how, I mean, the point about no transitional justice and no focus whatsoever on transitional justice in these past 10 years. That could have been led by the NLD. It could have been led by other, by elite politicians, but also it could have been led from the society. And we didn't see very much of that at all. I mean, the only major transitional justice measure that was forthcoming was the release of political prisoners under the U Thein Sein administration from 2012 and then in successive waves. And that was a very important measure. But the reconciliation theme that underpins transitional justice movements has been largely absent in Myanmar. And so there's been a kind of fundamental pragmatism, I guess, that many people have adopted. And you can understand that after 50 years of dictatorship, and 50 years not only of dictatorship, which in some other societies has actually been transformative economically, but in Myanmar, of course, it was a catastrophe economically. And so you can understand people wanting just to get back on with their lives, to take 6 or 7% annual growth, and to say, we'll live with this for now. And things like transitional justice can come later, and the kind of rights of marginalized people, we can deal with that later. You can understand it. But now there's a realization maybe that wasn't the way to go, and that more could have been done in the past, even in the past 10 years, to address some of those issues. So on the question you asked, Brian, about the Rohingya, I mean, I guess we have to recognize that this goes way back. The Rohingya have been persecuted not only under Disciplined Flourishing Democracy, but also under SLORC and the SPDC, under the BSPP, under even in the democratic period in the 1950s. There was no real attempt at reconciliation in those days to try to bring in minority communities living in what was then Arakan, now Rakhine. There's a very long history to this. So I don't think we can just blame the 2008 Constitution and the structures, as you say, the kind of institutions that were created then. Of course, they didn't do much to move the country forward. They were intentionally not as inclusive as they could have been. They did not attempt to build a platform whereby national reconciliation or even the peace process could make much progress. And so we've not seen much progress in the peace process in the last 10 years. So again, more could have been written into the 2008 Constitution, and everybody's aware of that. Nobody wants to go back to that in the movement now. Nobody would see that as as being the next stage forward for Myanmar, because it was deeply flawed. But I mean, it goes really deep into the society. I guess one of the things that is a concern for the future, and it's been mentioned already, is that whilst this movement is all embracing and unified, there are so many tensions that, Brian, you mentioned class and ethnicity and everything. It is moreover a largely conservative society. It is a society that has a lot of kind of conservative underpinnings, and that will take a lot of work to move forward on the agendas that are now bubbling up within the movement. That they are not just going to be embraced by whatever settlement there is coming out of this, even if it's a good settlement that all of us would support. Many of the themes that have been mentioned already by my co-panelists in the past 55 minutes, some of those are going to fade away, unfortunately. It will take real work to keep them on the political agenda and move them forward.
Thank you for that, Ian. I just want to segue here as well into conversations as we turn towards the final part of our panel, or the third section of our panel, onto looking forward, onto looking into the sort of future prognosis for both the movement and also the country as a whole. And I guess I want to open this section with just an open question, essentially. Where do you see the movement going now in the short term? And we can move on to the long-term vision in a second as well, but just very briefly on the short term in terms of what's going to happen over the next few weeks. There's a lot of uncertainty up in the air, uncertainty over what foreign countries would do, Indonesia, Singapore, China, and there's also uncertainty as to how violent the crackdowns are about to get. So I was just wondering, for everyone in the panel, and perhaps we can start with Wai Wai here, where do you see the movement now, say up to April or May this year?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I think one thing that is really incredible to see these days is that I somehow started to realize people of Myanmar are willing to sacrifice. So with all of this protest, all of this CDM movement, they are willing to sacrifice, they're willing to sacrifice their lives, like for, their economy, their businesses, their job, their, what they have. A lot of them are willing to sacrifice. That's why they're doing this CDM movement, as Go Lin said, or the going out this on the street for almost more than 3 weeks now, and they're going to continue. They understand the retaliation, they understand the consequences, but yet they're willing to sacrifice. And some of them even started this what we call this the boycott military product campaign. So the social punishment against military and military businesses has also started. Not only trying to stop the government functions and administrations and different ministries and department, but also trying to punish the military businesses by having this kind of campaign. So what we need to see, what we need is, at this point, I think we need stronger international support on this, since people are on board and they are willing to do whatever they can, but we're not seeing that support, that level of support from the international communities. Yes, as Go Lin said, there has been statements and condemnations and some sanctions from the US, EU, and UK, Canada, but they're not strong enough. They will not make any difference. So what we need is a more collective, collaborative, multilateral response to the situations that include a more severe sanctions against the military businesses, military companies, and also having a reconvening the UN Security Council and having the stronger resolution that includes global arms embargo to the referral of the situation to Myanmar. I think unless Myanmar military feel the real hit, they're not gonna step back, right? The civil society organizations are also calling for the UN Security Council to send delegations or a body to monitor situations immediately in the ground and to mediate. I think if we don't have that level of response from the international community, nothing will change. I've just heard that the Indonesian Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, is scheduled to fly today, but the trip has been canceled, so not sure that. So basically, I don't think military has taken these actions for a short time, or to return the power. So we really need a stronger actions from outside so that it will complement the movement inside, and we will see some change. Otherwise, I couldn't be very optimistic here.
Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Lynn, yes, of course.
To support the statements of the Wai Wai Nu, I agree with her. And now I want to mention something about the protest ahead. And for example, the military coups around the world, and it takes time. It's a tough and long journey. For example, in Hong Kong, right, protests, it took between 6 and 9 months. It took so long. I talked with my friends from Hong Kong and Ayo Chan. So he said it took at least 6 months in Hong Kong. So it's take time. So we need to, in Myanmar, people need to be aware of that. It's not that easy. It's difficult. They know that. It also sacrifice of their life could happen. But for me, is that we don't need to die. They don't need to die. So they just protest peacefully, and then if they shoot, they run, and then they come back tomorrow, and they claim for their rights. And regarding the international interventions and support, we appreciate. People also appreciate that the support for the justice and democracy and human rights, particularly from the Western to the Western countries. And but this times the ASEAN, I want to mention a little bit about the ASEAN. This time, ASEAN should do more active actions in favor of democracy and justice. It is also mentioned in the ASEAN Charter. It's about democracy and justice and the human rights. So, but this time ASEAN should put more efforts in supporting the people of Myanmar. You can see the million people protesting on the streets. This is what they want. This is what they need, and what they fight for. It's peacefully on the streets. And even though 4 people sacrificed their lives so far, it's quite a lot. So we want, like Wai mentioned, that we want more active actions from the international society. And another point is that about the CRPs, Committee Representing Pirangzu Luto. So they might have planned to form the committees to take more actions, and also establishing the government in the near future, I think, and then to engage to support the people and civil society, civil disobedience movement, and then to fight to end the dictatorships in the country of Myanmar. And another point is geopolitics. And now the U.S. the statement, it's Myanmar's situation now. It's a threat for the U.S. Security, national security, which is national security of the U.S. It's the top priority. So that's mean a lot about Myanmar situations, and that is why some experts mentioned that that is why in many areas, including particularly in Yangon, the government, the military government, and the police, they didn't take the brutal action yet. So because of the international support and statements and others, we appreciate that. And at the same time, you see Myanmar is lying between India and China. And China has its interest, national interest. India has its national interest. And for example, India has a national interest to counter China. And in Myanmar, and for example, it's a Skeleton project. And China, their national interest, one of the national interests is the BRI, Belt and Road Initiatives. Particularly in Myanmar, it's a China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. And so they have some kind of influence on the Myanmar ethnic organizations. So now you see the statements, we saw the statement of some ethnic organizations such as KNU and RCSS, they are mentioning, they're supporting the movements and the side front for the people, going to help the people. So this time, and this is quite an exciting moment, and to unite the country, one of the key solutions could be the new constitutions and establishing the federal states in Myanmar. In order to do that, we people in Myanmar need the government of Myanmar military, the ethnic armed organizations and ethnic parties, and some others key players need to sit together and then make the new constitutions. This is one of the key and important steps to take. As you see in Myanmar, I've been around Myanmar and then talked with the ethnic people. I'm also ethnic people. So we want federal states, federal democratic states. This is one of the solutions, and this might be because of this military coup currently happening in Myanmar, and then it is also might lead to form a federal states. I hope. Thank you.
Thank you, and just bring in A here as well.
I think I would like to add a little bit to what Golin was saying earlier as well. But yeah, I think the next few months are going to really determine the shape of what potential solutions are possible. So right now we have the CDM movement, we have the committee representing Bidang Suvata, but assuming the strike is successful, assuming we come to a consensus that what we want is a new constitution, a federal union, which I don't think is necessarily consensus yet. I think people are pretty much in agreement about the constitution, but given the amount of sort of the racism, the sort of paternalism that is in a lot of leadership, or at least sort of elected leadership, and people recognized as leaders currently, I don't think it's a given that a federal democracy is something that people are going to fight to the death for, in the same way that they might fight for a more general sense of what we're calling democracy, however, whatever shape that is in. But assuming that those things happen and that there's an agreement, right now there's no next step, right? CRPH does not necessarily have the legitimacy and mandate of an elected government formed as an opposition to the Military Security Council. They've taken steps. They've nominated a UN representative. They've created a foreign liaison office in the US. And if other countries recognize it, if the majority of the Myanmar people who are out in the streets now recognize it, that might be a body through which these negotiations and changes happen. But I think in the next couple of months, we're really going to see who the players will be, who create these sort of end stage goals. And then I also think these next couple of months, we're really going to see if this movement has stamina, right? Payday is on the 28th. It's 4 days from now. And civil servants are not risking just this month's pay. They're risking potentially months, if not years of pay. Their status in society, where they go from being people in good, well-paying, respected positions to essentially people living off of the goodwill of the people, and pensions, right? Like long-term stability. And right now, it might be an easy choice, but in a few months, if electricity isn't coming, if there's no sewage system, like when life gets hard, we're really going to have to see if the CDM movement, if Myanmar society can come together and create alternative structures, or recreate structures of government in collaboration with some sort of body that the people do recognize. And yeah, like in addition to all of the stuff that everyone's already said about the international community, I think those are some of the considerations on the ground as well.
Thank you. And on the subject of the CRPH, now a common criticism that's been made towards the CRPH is that it is not a representative organ because it's largely composed of sort of former or current elected MPs from the NLD, with minimal representation granted to other parties on the ground. And I was wondering, Lynn, do you have any thoughts on that criticism of the CRPH, and more broadly, if that's a right path going forward, especially in light of what A said just then about the disagreement within the movement over what role it should or could play, that is CRPH?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. In CRPH now, it's not only the NLD right now. There's a two ethnic parties join the CRPH, and also because in elections, NLDs won the elections with over 82% of the seats in the Union Parliament. So they have rights to establish the new government, as you know. But as you see the move of this NLD before they formed the elections, before the military coups, they have a teams. I mean the CEC for the NLD, and they particularly the leader is Dr. Almunyo. Who's one of the member of the Central Executive Committee of the NLD, and also he's also the chief minister of the one of the chief ministers of Magwe regions, and also Dr. Nakin Thuymien. She also the chief minister of the Kenyan states and also CEC of NLD. They travel around in ethnic areas such as the Shan state, the Mon states, and meeting with the ethnic political parties. Because I think in these 5 years, and they have a new plan, I think, to form it's very united and inviting the other political parties to be involved in politics and also in governing the government and running the country. And then they have a different approach. That's why you can see the movement before this happened. And CRPH, it's that I think so to form maybe I don't know in the future's government, they're claiming that they're legitimate bodies elected by the people, most of the people, and that's why they are releasing the statements and also including the governing plan in the society, because of in the nighttime they social unrest because of some rumors and because of some violence, the fires and stuff like that. So they suggested to govern and to manage the society. They have a plan already released for that. They all appointed CRPH recently appointed Dr. Sasa and as a UN as a representative of Myanmar, and to take care of the international affairs, particularly with the UN. And then another person in the US to take care of the international relations of the CRPH. So now I see that they have better plans in the futures to be able to end the dictatorships in Myanmar, at the same time to help the people, to help the government staff who are doing CDM, and by supporting the funding and by coordinating with the donors and there are also people, and And there are some people like my friends, they are not interested in politics. Now they are on the streets, and they're highly educated from others, the first country, and they are now together and protesting. At the same time, there's some rich people and also the middle class. They collected some funding, supporting the CDM stuff. And for example, one of my friends called Kaimon, she's graduated from Singapore and doing businesses. She has less interest in politics now. She's fighting for justice, human rights, and then supporting the CDM first, CDM government stuff, So and in the future, CDM also need to unite and work together with the other organizations, so civil society organizations that they're doing now. And then I think they will be more organized and collect all the strengths across the country. And for example, one legitimacy of the CRPH, right? So it's the British representatives to the UN and the ambassadors read the letter statements from CRPH in the UN meeting, right? So that's some kind of support and recognizing the CRPH as a legitimate body in Myanmar. This is one of the examples. I hope the international society might take more actions and then stand with the CRPH and other legitimate organizations. And the people, or for example, the NLD-led government, like President Wu Min and our State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi, and elected government, they stay affect the power before until the 31st of the March 2021, right? And the new government, the elected government, will take over the powers in the 1st of April. So people are supporting, claiming for the legitimate government, but they've been detained by the military leaders, and the international and people are asking to release them, but also releasing the others, activists and some actors, some the public figures. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And as we near the final sort of moments of our wonderful panel today, I'd just like to perhaps open up just a question for all and everyone on the panel. We've talked a lot about what the short-term prognosis is like for Myanmar. We've also spoken about the changes that Myanmar desperately needs. But if there's sort of an image of an ideal Myanmar that you'd like to strive for or work towards, what would that look like effectively for you? And in general, do you have any thoughts and messages to share with the audience on that front concerning the vision for a better Myanmar in the medium to long term? And perhaps here we can start with Wai Wai as well.
Oh, great. So, all right. I guess for me, what is more important to remind people of Burma and people in Myanmar as well as the international community is that first, it is very, very important, very, very critical for us to hold these perpetrators of international crimes accountable. We cannot let, these alleged perpetrators of genocide and crimes against humanity to rule the country again. Military has done enough for the country, and so, regardless of they step down or not, whether we got compromised with them, the Aung San Suu Kyi government and the military or not, it is essential to address the questions of accountability. If not, we are going to see recurrence of the crimes, and we are going to have recurrence of the coup. You know, we will never be free from the military influence. So to be able to remove military from the politics, the only way we can do is by holding them accountable for their past crimes. So that is the most important thing. With that, I think a country future that we need for the people of Myanmar, for all people, apart from, you know, all people, you know, regardless of, including the Rohingya and other ethnic minority, is, I think it's been quite consistent from the many ethnic communities, which is the Federal Democratic Union. And in addition to that, I would emphasize, you know, when we talk about federal democracy, yes, there are many forms of federal democracy. What we need in Myanmar is, in such a diverse country, is that the assurance of the rights of the ethnic minorities within states. For example, in Shan State, or in Kachin State, or in Rakhine, you know, for Rohingya, we are a minority group in an ethnic state. So at that level, decentralizations of the power and the protections of the minority rights and assurance of the future of the minorities has to be guaranteed in that democratic, inclusive democracy, in that democratic future that we want to see. Otherwise, you know, we will be again, you know, leading to majoritarianism, you know, such what essentially we had in the past 10 years, I guess. I think if we're not overcome from that status quo, we're not going to see a brighter future for the country unless, you know, we protect the most marginalized in the country and assure their rights, you know. And for instance, in the US, you know, there is under Constitution, you know, it's not through the federal setting, but through the Constitution, they have this protected group, right? The civil and freedom of the protected groups should be assured, and that is secured by the constitutions, and the federal court actually guarantee those rights of the, you know, race, gender, etc. This protected group they have, right? So I think we need to envision that level of future. Right now, I don't think, you know, the majority Burman leaders most of them are looking for that future, but I think that's the only future we need to be looking forward. Otherwise, you know, we're not gonna see a real freedom, or, you know, or even peace in Myanmar. As you know, we have six decades, one of the longest civil war in the country because of the inequality and mistreatment against the ethnic community. It's not excluded to the Rohingya, but we have many other ethnic communities and religious minorities, Hindus and Christians, who are not part of the so-called ethnic nationality list. They are subjected to be like second-class citizenship. I think we need to consider all of these nitty-gritty small minorities. Well, if not, we're not gonna see a brighter future for the country. I think
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, it's been a long day. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. Thank you very much. And I'll bring in Ulin here as well.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. So the key is the collective strength of the people of Myanmar. It's a unity. So we got to stand together and stay strong and protest and peacefully. And they're very lovely. And the peaceful protests, they go out and protest together with disciplines. Like you can see in Yangon and other cities, even though a million people go out on the streets, and there are people collecting garbages, cleaning the roads by themselves, the people, and not the government. And they're very united. And so for them, people want some. I talk with some experienced people and who have experience in 1988 and uprisings. I got some suggestions, and then they want them to keep away from designated violent peoples in the crowd, and avoid confrontations with police and soldiers, and so stay away from them, and then could control their emotions and focus on peaceful protest, and get rest and and then so they can go back tomorrow, and they always tomorrow, and they should also learn for the next move. They should take care of the health at this time of global pandemic COVID-19, and they are smart, and be smart. They should be smarter at this journey, as this journey is long and tough. If armed forces use violence, move and shoot, run, hide, and come back tomorrow, protest peacefully to claim what people deserve: democracy, human rights, and the federal states. So, as I mentioned, this is a long and tough journey. And second point is that we need more strong supports and actions from international society and organizations such as the UN Security Councils, and US and its allies, and to take very concrete actions. And that's what people want. You can see in the protest, and they want to the embassies and UN offices, and then they're showing the desire. And this time in the China and Russia and other countries, this time to help support the rights and will of the people, majority of the people of Myanmar, and particularly China, and should take more actions and stand with the people this time. And the third point is that, like Ian mentioned, about the peace process and the civil war that we mentioned, and we need the new constitutions and federalisms to end the longest civil war in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. And here I'll bring in A as well.
I guess my vision for the future of Myanmar is I would hope to see a society that centers consent of the governed, participation as sort of the main determination of whether or not one belongs to a group, and the removal of violence from our institutions. So in terms of participation, I'm not particularly tied to the shape of Myanmar as it is now, right? Like before colonization, the country that we now call Myanmar was a collection of states, random villagers who were not particularly tied to any kingdom, or just people who happen to live in an area who are now sort of shoved together and told you need to make things work. And if some of those people essentially, through a democratic process without violence, decide we don't want to be part of the state particularly, I think, I would support their move to govern themselves in a way in which, is democratic and protects the rights of minority, but is not necessarily a part of Myanmar. And then I think in terms of civic participation, I think Myanmar, one of the biggest problems we have right now, is the idea that some people, by virtue of their birth, inherently belong to a country or a land, and some people simply don't. And there's no way to change that about yourself. And, I'm an American citizen, and as often as I criticize the US, I think something very strong it has going for it is the fact that anyone can become an American. Of course, there's racists and people who are always just going to be like, no, you need to be white to be American. But, in general, in the general sense of society, right, anyone can become an American. And I think that Myanmar also needs to have an understanding that to be Myanmar is to participate in Myanmar society. It's not a matter of one's skin color, religion, any of that. And then the removal of violence. I think it's not just the military, right? We have a prison system here that is about punishment of disappearing people from society and saying you don't belong. It's not about addressing why they might have committed crimes. It's not about addressing why certain things are crimes in the first place. Like many Rohingya people are criminalized simply for exercising what should be a fundamental right to movement, right? Like you move from one city to another, now you're a criminal, and the system just, it tortures people, it destroys people's futures. We have extreme class divides in Myanmar where the rich not only can afford more and can just buy safety and comfort and food and shelter, but also can essentially create a caste system in which the poor have to lower themselves, both physically, emotionally, and essentially debase themselves in order to survive. So I don't quite know how we're all going to get there to this vision I've laid out, but I think those are sort of the core elements I would like to see.
Brian, can I add one more point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because according to some experts and the many people see the sanctions are not favored from international society, and particularly from the U.S. and the West. But the U.S. move, they announced sanctions on some military leaders in its affiliated businesses. This is a good move, and according to people and to some experts, because sanctions on Myanmar overall didn't work in the past. You can see in the past decades, long military dictatorships in Myanmar. You can see the sanctions from the U.S. and the EU and the West and Japan and others. It doesn't work to end the dictatorships, but instead the people of Myanmar and SME and they suffer a lot from their businesses, and so that is one of the points from people and some experts. So rather than that, because this is a new era, a new age, so the other international societies and organizations, they should think of others kind of sanctions, and instead of putting general sanction on Myanmar, it doesn't work because the military had owned many kind of businesses across Myanmar, and Myanmar is rich in natural resources. Stay rich in natural resources, they could sell it to other countries and by themselves. So because this is also the time of a very tough time for other countries, including Myanmar, because of the COVID-19. So all the businesses are down. So Myanmar also suffering a lot, and many people lost their jobs in private businesses and other businesses, and it's going down. Some experts say that it could be worse than the Great Depressions. So please, my last point is that to request the international society, UN and US and the West and others country who support the justice, human rights, and democracy, and please support the country, Myanmar, help people of Myanmar by taking actions, active actions, concrete actions, and avoid some actions and statements to suffer that might be a negative impact on people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, for the last word on the panel, I guess, Ian, would you like to just share with us your concluding remarks, if that's all right?
Thanks, Brian. I don't want to have the final word, but it's been really fascinating listening to everybody and the visions that have been sketched out. I mean, I think that those are the pointers that people in international society need to pick up on. You know, it's what the Myanmar people themselves want, that all of us outside need to support. I guess one feeling is that it needs to be a kind of realistic self-assessment that Myanmar people engage in, and some of that has happened. I mean, Mae mentioned, several times the racism that is present in Myanmar society and that cannot be sketched over. U Lin mentioned that a certain type of sanctions didn't work very well in the past, and therefore sanctions, if there are going to be sanctions this time around, need to be very carefully calibrated to ensure that they are actually delivering for Myanmar people. And it's that sense of kind of realism that strikes me as necessary. There's a lot of idealism in the movement right now, and that's understandable. It's also great, and it's a joy to see what many people are inspired by as they come out on the streets of Myanmar. But I guess some of the hopes that have even been expressed on this panel strike me as being a little bit unrealistic. I mean, that ASEAN is suddenly going to become a kind of force for democratization and federal democracy in Myanmar after everything we know about its non-intervention, non-interference policy. Unlikely. You know, the fact that the aspiration that China and Russia will reform their practices on the Security Council in the next few years and kind of become the friends of the Myanmar people. Unlikely again, I would say. So a healthy dose of realism strikes me as also important going forward. And maybe that's where people in international society can help out. So a little bit in kind of bringing comparative experience to bear. I mean, Myanmar people know their own history. So you don't need outsiders to tell you your own history. But Myanmar's not the first country in the world to have suffered a military coup. It's not the first country in the world to have people on the streets demonstrating against the dictatorship and authoritarian regime, facing the kinds of dilemmas and conundrums that you face going forward. And so drawing on that comparative experience and trying to work out what's going to be the best way forward for Myanmar is maybe where international society can also step in. But yeah, I mean, international society absolutely does not have all of the tools in its toolkits, all of the answers that Myanmar people are looking for. We know that from the experience of the last 50, 60 years. I don't mean to end on a negative note, but just a kind of realistic stock take.
Thank you, Ian. And I guess to end the panel on a more optimistic note, I'd just like to take this opportunity personally and also on behalf of the review to thank all of you for this incredible discussion. It's been both incredibly enlightening and insightful, but also very, very encouraging to hear your thoughts, your views, and your passions and vision for Myanmar. And I just want to say, I hope everyone stays safe. And I hope Myanmar forges a path ahead, one that's for all people, regardless of races, ethnicities, backgrounds, one that's just, democratic, and fair. And with that, thank you all very much for joining us here for the panel discussion at the review. And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you.